Liebe Festgemeinde, hey! The time has finally come. We will be using all our power, because we are like Thanos, inevitable. Just like Thanos, we collect Infinity Stones. Only we replace stones with builds. You heard right, Infinity builds. If that doesn't mean anything to you right now, Infinity builds are combinations of items, relics and/or skills that enable us to prevent our opponents from ever getting a turn. Either we win directly in round 1, or we manage to prevent our opponent from playing their turns. Quick disclaimer, the builds I'm about to show you work on the current patch, but they may not work in the selectable testing branch. Since I assume that this branch will not go live in its current form, I focused on the live patch. But enough preamble. It's time to feel the power of our backpacks. Let's go. When a curse becomes a blessing, Purse, Satchel, Pochette and Crate have an easy time with their opponents. Basically, all you need are two specific items, Happy Buckler and Spiky Crown. When these two are placed next to each other in the backpack, they develop a simple but powerful interaction. When the buckler is activated, we get block, trigger the crown and get spikes in return. The damage from the crown is absorbed by block and the energy cost of the buckler is reduced by 1. But as you can see, that's not quite enough. For this to work properly, we need to reduce the cost of the buckler to 0 first by using another item adjacent to the crown, preferably a shield. We then use the other shield first and then the buckler as often as we want to defeat the enemies. This costs us a total of 1 energy, which we should always have. Of course, we can also choose a different setup with other items. As long as the crown triggers once before we use the buckler, anything is possible. For Crate, this works in a very similar way. Here, we can use the shield to trigger the crown initially. Although the Happy Crown build can perform one action infinite times, it allows the opponent to take their turn, so it is only infinite to a limited extent. It also depends on the opponent actually attacking, making it vulnerable to poison. That's why I have another variant or upgrade for you. Add a bashing shield, stack infinite block and smash your opponent's ears. Guaranteed one-shot potential. The only limitation here is our energy, as we need energy for the bashing shield. So we have to be careful about who we attack first. However, Crate struggles with this method, as we would need a very complex setup to use the bashing shield effectively. Depending on the available components, other shields may provide us with better block. But I'm very open to screenshots of viable builds with it. 2 relics can also be very useful for this build. Belt of Knives loves it when items are triggered often. Since we trigger Happy Buckler as often as we want, in theory every enemy can be taken down in round 1. Incidentally, Shield Spirit is always worthwhile, as it saves us a lot of clicking when enemies are a little hesitant with their attacks. So now that we've covered Purse, Satchel, Pochette and Crate, let's move on to Toad. But first, a small request. If you like my videos, please subscribe and leave a like. If you want to support me further, just be active, either here in the comments or live on Twitch. It helps more than you think. Okay, now let's continue with the video. If you think the last build was simple, just wait and see what the Hack and Fuel build does to you and your carpal tunnels. First, we need at least 1 oak hatchet. In my opinion, one of the best items for Toad. We also need 1 fuel pellet, and we're done. Ideally, we have reduced our deck to such an extent that we have so few carvings that we always draw pellet and hatchet when we need them. The easiest way to do this is to have no other carvings in the deck except these 2. We also make sure that there's no armor or shields in the backpack, otherwise the hatchets will be discarded immediately. But how exactly does the build work? The idea behind it is that the fuel pellet refreshes the hatchet, and in return, the hatchet repeatedly draws the fuel pellet. So, put the hatchet in your backpack, place the pellet in the same row, activate the hatchet, place the pellet next to it, and so on. Truly infinite, but also infinitely exhausting. We can make it a little easier for ourselves by increasing the number of hatchets that we have, which saves a few clicks. Theoretically, it's also possible to take 3 saps with us if we have at least 4 hatchets, but it's still tedious. We can speed up the process somewhat by taking wooden or thorn shifts with us. These scale with each use, but are also refreshed by the fuel pellet. However, it is important to ensure that our deck always draws our key items, no matter how unlucky we are. 2 relics can help us somewhat with this build. Reverse Hourglass allows us to increase the number of carvings we draw, provided we manage to empty our hand. Wasp Honey increases our damage slightly, as it damages all enemies every 3rd carving. Helpful, but not crucial. If you've been wondering whether Toad's kin items can be useful, I have a clear answer. Yes, infinitely useful. For this build, we take a Mana Stone, a Daughter's Diary, 2 Mother's Blades, and that's it. An infinite loop is born. The whole thing works quite simply. We place the book next to the Mana Stone, because we can't place it without it. Next to it, we place first one blade, then the other, and keep drawing again and again without the opponent being able to do anything. And there's not much more to say about it, really. Theoretically, you could also add another Mana Stone, or a larger one, another book, and a Sister Spear to get a little more scaling via the spear. The important thing is to keep our deck narrow enough so that we can keep drawing the Mother's Blades. And now it's time for our prickly summoner, Pauchette. With her special pet mechanics, she offers a number of possibilities for creative builds. The one I have for you today, however, is more likely to put your opponents to sleep. Unlike other builds presented, opponents usually get a turn in this build, but they will simply skip it. Basically infinite in its own way. At the heart of this build is the legendary Pet Bed, which puts the targeted enemy to sleep when the pet carrying the bed is summoned. When we summon the pet with a bed, the targeted enemy receives a stack of sleep. When we recall the pet and resummon it, this happens again, until we run out of energy. This is also the limitation of this build. Pauchette has 2 energy by default. So if we have any pet with a bed, it will be summoned in the first round, assuming we have the starting item. We will recall it and send it out again immediately. A total of 2 stacks of sleep, followed by only 1 stack in each subsequent round. This is enough for any boss, but large groups of enemies are still problematic. There are various ways to address this problem. When choosing a pet for this build, Big Dinky is our first choice for one simple reason. It costs us no energy to summon him. This allows us to double the sleep stacks we can inflict each round. However, without treats, which Dinky uses to inflict damage or status effects, enemies are spared for the time being. If we have excess energy, Pauchette can of course deal damage herself. I also find Lenny very interesting, as we usually won't have much trouble getting a few mana stones, and Lenny himself counts for 2 mana. If we balance our mana budget, he works almost like Dinky. Incidentally, Lenny generates mana himself with every attack and can thus deal the necessary damage. However, we can improve the setup with the right treats, especially Refreshing Herb. Refreshing Herb gives the pet 1 point of energy each time it is summoned. With 1 herb, you can completely cover Lenny's mana costs and significantly increase damage output. For Dinky, of course, anything that does damage is good. Since we don't need many more items for the build, we can obtain energy through relics such as ore or mousewood, or certain energy items. All of these items and relics are very suitable if we limit ourselves to a few items and convert expensive items into money. In addition, Jerry is also an option, of course, especially if we have more than 1 summoning stone. As a result, we can keep as many opponents at bay as we have energy, provided we have the right pet with a bed and the right treats. However, there's a rare problem that can arise here, namely opponents with a defender trait, which prevents opponents behind them from being targeted. We solve this problem with grapple, where several of them may make sense, in my opinion up to 3, to bring out the opponents behind the defenders. Since the build around Pochette's pets was a bit more complex, let's now turn to something simpler. Something so simple that you could almost call it undercomplex. Crate offers many opportunities to deal immense damage with elaborate builds and appear virtually untouchable at the same time. This is usually achieved by keeping the charge flying around for as long as possible, triggering many different components in the process. What if I told you that we can reach infinity with only 4 items, including the core? The linchpin of this build is a single relic, Belt of Knives. Without it, the whole thing doesn't work. But once we have it, switching to Endless is infinitely easy. Belt of Knives deals damage when 5 items are used. This isn't particularly spectacular, except that every time the charge passes through a component, it counts as 1 use of this item. Each component can be used as many times as you want, so we want our charge to fly around over and over again without being used up. A very simple setup would be Blade of Knives, core and 2 reversers. The core shoots out the charge and the reversers play ping pong with it until there are no more enemies left. Of course, you can also create other setups as long as the charge keeps flying. Obviously, this only works if we actually receive a Belt of Knives, but then switching to this build should always be possible, even if it is not always desirable. Was that too easy for you? To be honest, it was for me too. That's why I've brought another build for our robot hamster. For this build, we need a little luck and a lot of coal. In addition to our core, we need 2 coals, 1 reactive cell, and at least 1 zero energy weapon, such as shivs or a machete. We pack all these into a row and let the magic begin. Our initial charge flies to the weapon, triggers it, and thus also the reactive cell. The charge continues to fly and hits the first coal, refreshing the weapon and the cell, then the second coal, which in turn refreshes the first. The charge then starts from the cell, reactivates the weapon and continues to fly to the coal. Everything is refreshed and the next charge starts. All in all, it's very simple once you get the items together. At first, enemies are defeated very quickly with it, but once they have more HP, it can take a while. Therefore, it makes sense to use the machete to hit all enemies at once and pack as much rage as possible onto it so that the whole thing scales well. So much for the builds I wanted to show you. Of course, there are other variants and infinite builds that I haven't mentioned here. If you think I should show you more, let me know in the comments and leave a like while you're at it. Finally, a word of advice. Don't overdo it. Especially the very easy to achieve combinations can make the game incredibly boring. But that's all for today's words of wisdom. If you enjoyed it, liebe Festgemeinde, come back again or treat yourself to another video. Feel free to subscribe, like and comment. I'd be delighted. See you next time. Take care. Ciao.